Welcome, Quinn. Thank you for an awesome talk. I'm sure a lot of people took a lot from keeping noise down in sensory systems. It's pretty
If nothing else,
complicated.
they enjoyed the little pop-up alerts that appear, I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it dovetails nicely in with the rest of the talk. I think some of the organizers were just saying that it works nicely. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So to start off, one of our first questions: do you have any experience with information radiators that work well in a remote working world?
Let's see. So when we're talking, I guess when we're talking about that, are we talking about like
Like
just getting
I'm
things
thinking of
reading
like wall
or?
boards and like getting having means of like persistent dashboards so people can see kind of the state of a system, ongoing alerts, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so I guess the way I'm thinking of the question is there's a little kind of fork where there's some information that's
Mhm.
going to be persistent in that by the nature of the way you design things, whether you're in an office or not. And so when you're looking at designing those, you want to make sure that you're getting the right information funneled up to the top insofar as that's concerned, because you really want to make sure that you're not living in those types of dashboards. You kind of have them to dive into them, right? It's to make that triage very, very fast. So when you're looking
Mhm.
at that, make sure you have a firm understanding of like that's very, very, very top level. I hate using that phrase, implications of your metrics, because you really want to surface only a few at the top and dive into them, right? You don't want to have everything. It's kind of the same thing, except instead of a pop-up notification, you're going to have dashboard noise, where if
Mhm.
you have too much on that dashboard, you're going to be like, great, oh no, like the second there's a problem. Not that you can't have separate
Yeah.
dashboards to communicate different things, right? So another thing, and this is where I was talking about the fork, if you're trying to communicate not for the purposes of triage for like an engineer to like dive in because there's a problem, that type of dashboard, and you have another type that might be an exact dashboard or something where you need to
Mhm.
communicate a lot of status information, but they don't need to dive into it. They just need to see it
Mhm.
surfaced. In that case, kind of as a pivot, you need to rather understand what metrics tie into business metrics in a way that's meaningful. So on the one hand, you want to know what metrics you can dive into. So you're like, oh, this is a problem statement, and this is the surface details of those problem statements. And then on the other side, you want to say, okay, well, these are the things that tie into like revenue lines or whatever your execs are saying. Hey, can you tell me like what does an outage mean? How
Mhm.
do I communicate that? What does a lack of an outage mean? Hopefully,
Mhm.
and surface that in a very robust but definitely more busy exact type dashboard. So you're going to look at
Mhm.
those two types of things.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of like splitting out and figuring out like first what information needs to be radiated to whichever group is interested in it.
Right. So
You know.
so
Yeah.
first is
What the
figuring out
need
who the
is.
audience of the dashboard is, and then
Mhm.
second, like meet with them, talk with them, figure out what they need, surfaced insofar as their understanding of the problem. Then you tie in with what you know that means in terms of system speak and say these are the things that answer the questions that you just asked me, and translate those into dashboards.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Makes I feel like it would be much harder to kind of make one nebulous thing that would work for everybody. It'd be kind of impossible.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, yeah.
Right. That's when
Awesome.
it starts to get really difficult, for sure.
Yeah. And it gets
Right.
busy and harder to use for all those different purposes. And yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so you mentioned it during your talk that when everything is emergency, nothing is.
Mhm.
So what are some possible ways that you can maybe communicate to other people that, I've heard your request. It's not necessarily my current priority right now because I have these other, say, fires or something that I'm putting out. How do you go about doing that without causing too much friction, without creating enemies or training them out of ever talking to you?
Yeah, so the first stop for that is empathy, right? So we've all submitted questions to somebody. Maybe we're using a third party service. Maybe we're just trying to exist in our non tech professional lives, but we're still kind of imbued in technology, right? So when we reach out to these other third party services, we kind of have a feel for what kind of messages make us feel like we're being listened to, but maybe later versus we're not being listened to at all. So when we start to just sit with ourselves for a minute in the first place, we can start to get a feel for maybe I don't need to tell them it's not a priority right now, but I have some other way of communicating an expectation, right? So for example, let's say I get in we'll say it's a feature request. It's not a bug. It's nothing out in my service that I'm running. So it's a feature request that I might need to add to a roadmap. It's bigger than maybe they think it is when they send it to me. Happens all the time. So I might say, you know what, I'll add this to, and you'll start to tell them a little bit about what mechanically they can expect so that they don't expect a response from you in 10 minutes, right? You're going to give them something around an SLA to SLO, like you're going to give them some sort of promise within those front-facing service level agreements where you're like, oh, I'm going to respond to you via email maybe in 10 minutes, but I might not expect you to have something in your hand in 10 minutes. And you're going to answer that way. But you also don't want to promise something you can't deliver. So if it is something kind of nebulous where you're going to have to put it into a roadmap or something, you can't say this will be out next quarter, because there's a whole bunch of reasons we all know that might not happen. So instead, you might want to say, I've put this into our queue. We're going to assess it and look at it for our next feature set or something that communicates a longer term commitment. But if it's something you can fix right away, you can communicate that too and say, you know what, I can do this for you today, next week, or whatever. So really communicating the way you would want to be communicated with a dash of kind of corporate, employee responsibility into there so that you're not promising things. The flip side of that is to try and build a good positive momentum in that direction, because we've also heard the feedback from places where it's like, oh, I'm going to add this to my roadmap or whatever. And you start to sneakily suspect that roadmap means black hole, right? It's not really being added to anywhere. So if you can't do something, like you need to make sure that you're empowered to say that we can't actually do this, or this isn't in our vision for the product, but say so again in an empathetic way. A quick example, so I don't hold up the whole Q&A on this, that I like to give is I've definitely asked Slack for regex in Slackbot 100 times. And they're definitely I'm pretty sure that I'm the only one asking for this, because everyone else might write a bot or not care, right? A very nice bimodal distribution for this problem space. Meanwhile, I'm like, no, I'll just use the tool you have. If you just give me some regex, let me. Who else is asking for that? No one. And they handle it very well every time. Right? They don't promise me that they're going to do anything about it other than say, yeah, we know you still want regex.
Yeah.
So that empathy can go a long way, because obviously I'm not mad, right? Even though they're telling me no, there's a way to handle that no statement without making someone feel like, oh, not only are you telling me no, you're doing it in a way that I feel unimportant, or to the other part of the question, feeling friction for even asking. Yeah.
Yeah. So approaching with some empathy and stuff, just to, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think that works for broadly anytime you're building
broadly
that function. Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on situations when there's when the different recipients for an alert have their own thresholds for what an acceptable noise level is? So you have different teammates that are all on call, or.
So ideally, I'm gonna emphasize that word heavily. Ideally, if you're on the same team, so you're talking about one alert, one recipient, but who that recipient is will depend on where you're at on the on-call schedule. The team should have unity around that type of thing, because in order to we talk a lot at PagerDuty anyway about, you don't want cross-team, different definitions for different levels of priority and urgency. You certainly don't want inter-team different understandings of those concepts either. So what needs to happen as part of the alert design when you're setting up your monitoring around whatever you've built, you need to have a discussion so that you're all on the same page. And even if there's some dissension, everything's within acceptable limits for what that dissension is. You definitely don't want to find yourself in a situation where 1 week to the next there's very differing expectations, or someone's kind of winging it and going in to readjust to what they think they should have for when they're on call, because then you're going to get massive inconsistency. Something will look like an incident 1 week and not to the next. And that will really kind of mess around with other numbers around how many truly urgent incidents do we have or whatever, when that back end definition of urgency is being slightly shifted by individuals on the same team. So you really want to make sure you're having a conversation that goes into buy-in. Everyone needs to talk about why do we have differing, at the design phase, why do we have differing opinions on what this threshold is, if it needs to be a static threshold, And I want to make sure that we as a team are addressing these concerns. You usually will have a team lead trying to like mediate this kind of discussion, right? Or someone more senior, so that everyone has the opportunity to get their mindset. But you do need someone who can kind of tie break, because there might be everybody might have good things to say, and sometimes it's not that one is better than the other. It's like driving on the side of the road. You need to make sure you're all on the same side, right? So someone needs to tie break, and that's usually going to be the senior team lead person. But you do need to have consensus.
That makes sense. Yeah. Have to come together and figure out what that threshold is so it can be consistently applied. Yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
Or alternatively, if you're in a situation, just real quick, if you're in a situation where you think the threshold might need to change, you need to agree on the criteria for when that happens.
Yeah, and maybe that turns into like a broader discussion or something like that. But come together with an understanding of that. Let's see. I think we might be. I think we just have one minute left. So a little bit of we might not be able to get to the last couple of questions or anything, but so maybe if you have extra questions or anything, just we'll handle them out in Discord and everything like that, or maybe in open spaces or anything. But thank you so much again for your talk. And
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for answering all these questions. And
and I'll be hanging out in the Discord throughout the day. So if we do pipe them in, I'll answer them in Discord as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Quinn.
Absolutely. Have a great day.